Number 12, the Belgian Congo. 10 million people vanished, and the world barely blinked. Their crime? Being born in a land rich in rubber and ivory. What King Leopold II did in the Congo wasn't conquest, it was a personal crime scene disguised as colonization. Between 1885 and 1908, the Congo Free State wasn't owned by Belgium, it was Leopold's personal property, and he ruled it like a tyrant with no oversight. Rubber quotas were enforced with cut off limbs. If a man failed to meet targets, his wife or child might be held hostage, or worse. Entire villages were torched. Hunters with rifles were ordered to prove they didn't waste bullets. How? By returning with a severed hand for every shot. Missionaries, photographers, and even British politicians began leaking the truth. One wrote, "The world is growing darker because the Congo is being drained of life." Leopold earned £1.1 billion in today's money from this nightmare. When outrage finally caught up, Belgium quietly took the colony, keeping most of the profit and none of the guilt. And if you think that's bad, just wait till you hear what religious empires did in the name of purity. Number 11, the Umayyad Caliphate. They built palaces, mosques, and roads across 3 continents, but behind the glory was a legacy soaked in betrayal and religious bloodshed. The Umayyads weren't just leaders, they were gatekeepers of faith, and that came with brutal consequences. Ruling from Damascus between 661 and 750 AD, the Umayyads rapidly expanded the Islamic world, but their policies bred resentment. Non-Arab Muslims, called Mawali, were heavily taxed, denied positions, and treated like inferiors. This sparked widespread unrest across Persia and North Africa. Eventually, the Abbasid revolution overthrew the Umayyads, but not before blood was spilled in mosques, cities, and family homes across the empire. And yet, compared to the next civilization's obsession with ritual death, this was restraint. Because next, we head into a world where thousands were killed to keep the sun alive? Number 10, the Aztec Empire. They engineered floating cities and cosmic calendars, yet believed the sun would die without tearing hearts from living bodies. Their civilization rose on blood-soaked steppes where beauty and brutality danced in broad daylight. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, shimmered like a jewel in the middle of a lake, but inside its great temples, priests wielded obsidian blades to cut beating hearts from thousands of captives. Some ceremonies, like the dedication of the Great Pyramid, reportedly required 80,000 sacrifices in 4 days. Why? They believed the gods had bled to create humanity, so now humans had to bleed to repay them. Captives weren't just killed, they were honored, sometimes fed, bathed, and given clothes before being led to the top of a pyramid and laid on the altar. Poets wrote of flowers and blood blooming in Templo Mayor. Historians still debate the scale, but the bones don't lie. Entire temple floors were paved with them. And the scariest part? These sacrifices weren't a last resort, they were scheduled. But if this shocks you, the empire coming up next didn't take lives for gods. They took them for dominance. They built the largest killing machine the world had ever seen. Number 9, the Mongol Empire. They burned entire cities to the ground, then stacked the skulls in pyramids, all in a single afternoon. Led by Genghis Khan, the Mongols didn't invade, they eradicated. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Black Sea, the largest contiguous empire in history. But it grew not by diplomacy, but by blood. When a city resisted, the result was total annihilation. In Nishapur, over 100,000 people were killed after a Mongol commander's son died. Women, children, monks, it didn't matter. They even dug up graves to ensure no one remained. When Baghdad resisted in 1258, the Tigris River ran black with ink from destroyed books and red from human blood. The secret? Speed and terror. Mongol riders could travel 100 miles in a day. Their messengers had a passport system centuries before Europe dreamed of it. Some cities surrendered at the mere mention of Mongol approach. One chronicler wrote, "They came, they burned, they vanished." And yet, through this storm of death, they opened trade routes and built systems that lasted centuries. But the next empire wore suits and medals. It marched with banners and experimented on living prisoners with chilling precision. Number 8, the Empire of Japan. They built bullet trains and fighter planes, but behind the uniform was a blade, one that sliced civilians open while they were still alive. Imperial Japan's rise wasn't just about conquest, it was about testing the limits of human cruelty. From 1931 to 1945, Japan swept across Asia like a storm, but in Nanjing, China, that storm became a massacre. Over 6 weeks, 300,000 civilians were killed. Soldiers staged decapitation contests, buried people alive, and set entire neighborhoods on fire with people still inside. Then came Unit 731, a medical division that operated outside the law and outside humanity. Victims, including women and children, were dissected alive to observe organ failure. And the most chilling detail? After the war, many doctors in Unit 731 were granted immunity by the US in exchange for their research. What they unleashed wasn't just war, it was methodical, weaponized dehumanization. But as we go further back in time, we'll see another empire where death wasn't hidden in labs, it was celebrated in public arenas. Number 7. The Roman Empire. They bathed in marble halls, debated philosophy in togas, then packed into colosseums to watch men be torn apart by lions. Rome brought civilization, but it celebrated suffering as a sport. For nearly 500 years, the Roman Empire crucified rebels, enslaved whole tribes, and threw prisoners into blood-soaked arenas for entertainment. In one event alone, Emperor Trajan ordered 11,000 gladiators to fight, many of them slaves forced into battle. After the Spartacus rebellion, Rome crucified 6,000 captured slaves along the Appian Way. Their bodies hung for weeks, a message to all who dared to rise. Gladiator games weren't noble contests, they were executions with applause. Some even reenacted naval battles inside the Colosseum, flooding it with water before mass drownings. Yet through all of this, Rome considered itself the height of civilization. But the next empire? It took that civil mask and replaced it with gold, fire, and an obsession with erasing entire cultures. What Spain did in the name of God will leave you speechless. Number 6. The Spanish Empire. They crossed the ocean chasing gold, but what they left behind was a graveyard that stretched from Mexico to the Andes. The Spanish Empire didn't discover the New World, they dismantled it. After Columbus landed in 1492, waves of Spanish conquistadors followed, armed with steel, muskets, and a divine license to conquer. They didn't meet savages, they met civilians. The Aztecs and Incas had cities, economies, and empires of their own. But that didn't matter. Hernán Cortés brought down the Aztec Empire by allying with rivals and spreading smallpox. Francisco Pizarro tricked and executed the Incan emperor, then looted tons of gold. Entire tribes were forced into encomienda labor systems, working mines until they collapsed from exhaustion. Priests converted survivors, often through torture, book burnings, and fear. In the Caribbean, the native Taino population dropped from 300,000 to nearly zero in just 50 years. One Spanish priest, Bartolomé de las Casas, wrote, "Such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed, that no age can parallel them." And still, Spain became one of the richest nations in the world. But riches alone couldn't feed an empire. The British would soon master a darker craft, controlling the world, not just with weapons, but with starvation. Number 5. The British Empire. They built railways, ran parliaments, and taught the world English, all while letting millions starve beneath their flag. The British Empire didn't conquer with brutality alone, it conquered by withholding life. At its peak, Britain ruled over 25% of the world's population, but freedom? That was for London. In India, colonial policies during the Bengal famine of 1943 diverted rice to British troops, while 3 million Indians died of hunger. In Kenya, during the Mau Mau uprising, tens of millions were detained in brutal prison camps, tortured, castrated, and executed. Ireland saw repeated famines while food exports continued. And while they eventually outlawed slavery, the British economy thrived for centuries on the back of enslaved Africans, and compensated slave owners, not the enslaved. Even peaceful protests like the Amritsar massacre of 1919 ended with blood in the streets, 1,000 unarmed citizens gunned down in a public garden. They built an empire with manners and monocles, but their crown? It was forged in fire and polished with silence. And what comes next? A regime that didn't just starve its colonies, it starved its own people, on purpose. Number 4. The Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. He turned revolution into repression and paranoia into policy. Stalin didn't need foreign enemies, he made war on his own people. And the scariest part? Most of them applauded, until they disappeared. Between 1922 and 1953, Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union like a god, but one who struck down anyone who questioned him. His great purges executed over 1 million in fake trials. Another 20 million were sent to gulags, prison camps spread across the frozen ends of Siberia. If you told a joke about the government, you vanished. If your child overheard and repeated it at school, you vanished. But in the darkest chapter was the Holodomor in 1932. Stalin seized grain from Ukraine, blocked food aid, and created a famine that killed over 4 million. People ate bark. Some turned to cannibalism. All while the USSR exported grain to maintain its image abroad. A survivor later recalled, "The silence of our village was only broken by the sound of the wind and crying. And the world? Too afraid to speak." But before Stalin, there was another empire, one that erased people not with famine, but with mass executions, cultural erasure, and a genocide still denied today. Number 3. The Ottoman Empire. They ruled for centuries, balancing cultures and faiths, but when collapse loomed, they chose extermination. The Ottomans didn't just lose World War I, they tried to erase an entire nation on the way down. In 1915, the Ottoman leadership blamed Armenians for internal unrest. What followed was a state-sponsored genocide. Over 1.5 million Armenians were forced from their homes, marched into the desert, or murdered on the spot. Families were thrown from cliffs. Women were raped, mutilated, and crucified. Children were handed to Turkish families to be converted. Villages were leveled, and the Turkish government, to this day, refuses to officially call it a genocide. Photos from the time show fields of bones, bodies stacked in dry riverbeds, and railcars filled with corpses. One US diplomat stationed in the region said, "The slaughter of Armenians is the greatest crime of the war," and yet it's still missing from many history books. But the next empire? They didn't deny their crimes. They documented them with files, figures, and blueprints, because their final solution was designed to be efficient. Number 2. Nazi Germany. They didn't hide the killings, they organized them, charted them, and built factories of death with train timetables and gas calculations. Nazi Germany didn't just commit genocide, it industrialized it. Between 1933 and 1945, Adolf Hitler's regime transformed Germany into a brutal, efficient death machine. The Holocaust claimed 6 million Jewish lives, but it didn't stop there. Romani people, disabled individuals, homosexuals, Poles, Soviets, and political dissidents were also slaughtered. Victims were shipped by train to Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor, where they were stripped, tattooed, and gassed, often within hours of arrival. The Nazis measured the cost of Zyklon B gas and the profit margin from gold fillings, hair, and clothing. At the Wannsee Conference in 1942, Nazi officials sat around a polished table and discussed how to kill every Jew in Europe, as if reviewing a business plan. They filmed everything, labeled everything, so no one could deny it. But somehow, an even shorter reign managed to kill faster, with less technology, fewer years, and a level of cruelty that shocked even the Nazis who visited later. Number 1. The Khmer Rouge. No gas chambers, no bombs, no outside war, just a country turned against itself by a man who wanted to erase the idea of a future. In 1975, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge seized power in Cambodia. Within days, they emptied entire cities, forcing millions into the countryside to begin a pure agrarian society. Currency was abolished, books were burned, schools, hospitals, religion, all gone. Wearing glasses was a death sentence. Speaking French could get you tortured. Owning a Bible, an English book, or even looking educated meant execution. Over the next 4 years, an estimated 2 million Cambodians, 1 in every 4 people, died from starvation, torture, forced labor, or execution. The killing fields, as they're now called, are still filled with teeth and bone fragments that rise during the rainy season. And Pol Pot? He died in his bed. Never tried, never jailed, never even exiled. Sometimes the darkest empires aren't the longest, biggest, or most well known. They're the ones that teach us how quickly a society can turn when ideology replaces humanity. History remembers empires for their power, but rarely for their cruelty. If you want to uncover more hidden truths they never taught in school, click the next video on screen now.